Hello, everybody, and welcome to TSO Daily. I am your host, Mr. Craven. All right, guys. So once again, I've been going through a lot of testing. I want to get a lot of videos out there, cover a lot of content, especially when it comes to the public test server, because one of the new things that they've added, they've switched the lever from spell pen or spell resistance to physical and spell penetration. So with that in mind, I want to do a quick video on the determining factor of how much penetration the lever's given us in the base and the added effects for Munduses, and why if you ignore the lever, depending on your build, you might be making a very, very crucial mistake. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to basically unslot all of my, well, I didn't have to do that one, but all of my divine pieces. Okay, so I'm going to just be butt naked here for a minute. Okay, so what I want to show you guys here is the base value. So we already saw in the patch notes that the lever's base value is 2,752. That's without any piece of divine gear applied. So I'm going to go ahead and go piece by piece and watch how much we're seeing the scaled effect for penetrating value. Okay, very simple here. So we'll start off with the feet, obviously. Going to go in with one piece of Julianos. We see a bump to 2,958. See the bump to 3,164. See the increase to 3,371. $3,577. $3,784. $3,990. And the total is 4,196. All right, so with that in mind, if we were still to use a sharpened weapon, which, let's see here, right here, we're going to get the penetrating value of 1,376, right? So with that in mind, so we'll round it up to 1,400, whatever. Round this up to 42. So we're looking at, let me get my calculator. Just keep in mind, guys, whatever. Can't do this off the top of my head sometimes. Okay, 4,196 plus 1,376. We're looking at 5,572, right? That's without any champion points allocated in there. Now, keep in mind, in light armor passive, we have penetrating value through concentration. Max is 4,884. Even if I go with 2 more light pieces of armor, it doesn't increase more than that. So I only need 5 to get this passive unlocked. So we go ahead, and if we were to add that to our total as well, oh, forgot a digit. We're looking at 10,456, and we can adjust the differences in the champion points. Now, the major thing a lot of people are going to want to know is, you know, we're looking at 18,200 towards max resistance, right? But I always tell people to stay typically between 11 and 13. The reason being, in your trials, you usually have somebody, if you have a Templar who does an effect, they'll apply a Stamplar. They'll add the minor the minor fracture. Tanks, if they have pierce armor, will apply major fracture. Anybody with LA drain will apply major breach, so on and so forth. So, and that's 5,100 for those penetrating values. On the Nightblade, you can see that in the assassination skill under mark target. So it's 5,280. The tanks can apply that, so that would close the gap. The reason being, you want to get closer to 100%, so you're dealing the max amount. So max set, for example, for funnel health is currently 5,554. For every point of resistance that a target has, a deduction is made off of the applied damage. So you're not dealing 100% of your base value or your crit, depending on their resistance. That's why it's important to get your penetration values up there. The most important aspect, though, to keep in mind, for light armor, we have concentration. We have a penetrating value in our passive. Stamina doesn't. Stamina, we're getting weapon damage. It's a polar opposite. And during athletics, we're getting a movement speed for our 5-piece bonus sets. So this is kind of relevant, guys. That we have no penetrating value for medium armor wearers. Not even for heavy. Heavy, there's no real penetrating value. All right? So for light armor, you need less than stamina. But if you're a stamina user, the lever could be crucial for you. Not to say that you can't use the lever as a light armor wearer. If you need that extra penetrating value and you don't want to put as much into your spell erosion, you could get away with putting less. But for stamina users, ignoring the lever is going to force your hand into piercing as a more dominant point placement in your CP system. Why? Because you're making up the loss of your physical penetration. So depending on the gear you're running, well, let's say you're running a 2-fang or you're running spinners, for example. Let's go ahead and I'll open up this, hopefully if they have it. So we'll go down to Spriggans, for example. Okay, so Spriggans is still going to have a penetrating value of 3,861 physical pen. Now, depending on how you set up, like if you're not going to use the lever, this penetrating value could be considerable. In 2-fang, I like 2-fang, but it's a multiplier. For every damage, you have to keep doing consecutive damage for the multiplier to apply. Once your damage drops off, the effect drops off. So between targets, if your damage isn't consistent, you'll have to restart the whole process all over again. With Spriggan set, it's a consistent amount. It's already there. The value is there. You just have to make up the difference. Kind of one of the reasons I really do like Spriggan set, because we have a consistent amount of penetrating value. Now we have other sets to take in consideration that are applied in trials, such as Alkosh. So for example, my Stamp Sork uses Alkosh. Why? Because the penetrating value applies to me and to the target, the penetration. So once their resistance is down, that applies to the entire party. So that's why I really like the Alkosh, because that increases my DPS as well as my party and make up any of those difference loss. Same thing with Night Mothers. Night Mothers is a set that we can take a look at, and I do have that set here. That will apply to the entire party, because it's not penetrating, it's reducing their physical resistance. So Alkosh and Night Mothers reduces the physical resistance of the targets. So that's kind of one of the reasons I really like those sets, because that kind of deducts the difference that you need. So depending on your gear, your setup, and your layout, you, as a STAM user, you might want to be taking a look at the lever. You just might want to. So a lot of people in the past for stamina has always went with the shadow. Not to say that the shadow isn't good, but depending on penetrating value, it might be more of a mistake to go that route than to go with something like the lever. Once again, it all depends on your build, your gear, and your layout. But there's one definitely set we don't want to ignore, depending on penetrating values, is this Mundus. This Mundus becomes more relevant now because of the effects to sharpen. Sharpening being cut from 5,196 down to 4,000. So there's a 1,000 difference. now between the lover and what the sharpened trait gave us, right? So we get 300 and something more from the sharpened value now. So, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, for depending what set you're going to run, the lover would be a great set, but the sharpened trait might not be necessary because you can take up the penetrating differences. If you're running the lover, this is if you're running the lover Mundus, you can actually make up a lot of the penetrating value loss, which in Stam you're still going to put into piercing. It's not like you're never going to have 0 into piercing unless you're running like a double stack of penetrating sets. You might get away with that. It's not completely unfeasible, and then you can increase your damage to your base damage and your dot effects and critical damage. So if you didn't want to use into piercing and run 2 penetrating sets, you wouldn't have to allocate necessarily any points into piercing, depending on how you configure your setup. But depending on the gear, so if I have a set that doesn't have penetration, like Hundings, for example, this becomes a focal point along with the lover. So I could run Hundings, grab up the base damage from that set's bonus of the 299, now apply the difference into the piercing along with the lover. So I can run 4,100 and put in, an extra 4,884, or 4,000 something as the magic users have. It's not a complete 100%. So about 4,895 to make up the difference that the light armor doesn't have, that the medium armor doesn't have, that the light armor has. So once again, guys, this is kind of crucial. You got to pay attention to this. Also keep in mind that Crags, which is another setup,